I'm Janice Hossteiger. After 3 decades in the marketing business and many years of being an entrepreneur, I've learned a thing or two about marketing. Join me as we talk about marketing, small business, and life in between. Welcome to My Weekly Marketing.
I remember the first time I was a guest on a podcast. I was so nervous, like sweaty palms, heart racing. I was over-prepared, but still convinced I was going to forget everything I knew about marketing. I'm one of those people who can freeze in panic situations, so I had notes everywhere, literally taped to the wall in front of me, tabs open on my computer, bullet points written out. And even then, I remember thinking, what if I sound dumb? Or what if I ramble? Or what if I mess something up and embarrass the host? But the first interview actually went pretty well. She even asked me back for a second interview later on. So with my newfound podcasting confidence, I went on another person's podcast. But there, the host put me on the spot and started asking me for statistics that I didn't have over and over again. He wanted numbers that I didn't have in front of me, and he kept asking me about research, which I hadn't pulled up. I honestly felt like he wanted to humiliate me to make himself look good. It was a bad experience. So I could always feel that panic rising again. But that split second where your brain goes blank and your inner critic says, see, you shouldn't have said yes to do that podcast. But I got through that interview, and here's what I learned. Confidence is not about having every answer perfectly packaged. It's not about having every statistic in front of you. It's about being able to say something like, I don't have that number in front of me right now, but here's what I can tell you. And you just keep going. It's about trusting that you know enough to have the conversation. And it's about courage. Brené Brown said that courage is impossible without vulnerability. And I think that being on a podcast is definitely making yourself vulnerable. And that it's often born from facing adversity. And in that one podcast episode that I was on that I stumbled, that felt like adversity. And that's exactly what we're talking about today, because it takes courage to make yourself visible, to put yourself out there, but it also takes strategy. Today's guest knows both sides of that equation. Kristen Nolan has spent over a decade in corporate sales and account management across tech and retail, building her career on one simple truth. Authentic connection drives results. And now as a senior client account manager at Interview Valet, she architects full interview marketing campaigns, identifying target audiences, aligning messaging with demographics, and building funnels that actually turn listeners into buyers. She earned her MBA while she was supporting her military spouse through multiple relocations, so adapting under pressure and executing with stress is kind of her thing. So today we're talking about 2 things that go hand in hand: how to quiet that inner critic to build confidence, and how to strategically leverage being on a podcast as a guest to grow your business. Because a lot of times we don't stay invisible because we lack expertise. We stay invisible because we're afraid of being seen and afraid of who knows what. So let's change that. Here's my conversation with Kristen. Welcome, Kristen. Welcome to My Weekly Marketing.
Thank you so much, Janice. Thank you for having me.
So I mentioned Interview Valet in the intro, and for people who aren't really in the podcast world, what is Interview Valet and what do you actually do and who do you help?
Yeah, so Interview Valet, we are a podcast interview marketing agency, not to be confused with a podcast booking agency. So one thing that we do that is different, right? When we talk about booking our clients on podcasts, we do that and we get to talk about the strategy around what it means to show up as a well-prepared guest. How do you sound great, look great? And how do you utilize an interview in a way that makes the most sense to maximize your time, right? So when I say that, what does it look like when you prepare? What does it look like as a guest on a podcast? And what does it look like after the recording stops? So we really go through, different approaches on how to be a great guest and how to maximize the value that you have with podcast interview marketing.
Gotcha. Yeah, I've worked with Interview Valet a lot. You've sent me some fabulous guests, by the way, so I appreciate that.
Yeah, thank you.
So before you make the decision, well, let me say, as a business owner, a small business owner, sometimes we don't want to reach out and get on podcasts, right?
Yeah.
So what do you see over and over again with entrepreneurs who want to grow but hesitate to put themselves out there?
Yeah, I think it really comes from a place of, confidence, right? Well, I remember when there were a couple of us that guest on behalf of Interview Valet, and he set up a meeting and he said, I would really like it if you guys would guest on behalf of Interview Valet. And I remember thinking, who's going to want to hear my story? Like
Mm,
I'm not a CEO. I'm just me. And I think what you have to do is change your mindset around that, right? If you have a company, you have a product, you have a service, and you help people, right? So like, yes, you want to sell something, but the core of that is that you're there to help people. And so if you look at it from a lens of not who wants to listen to me, but rather what am I depriving the world of by silencing myself and not sharing what I have to offer, it stops being about you and it starts being about helping others. And I think when we come
mm,
from that place of service, we're able to look at it in a very different way.
love that because that is really true. I mean, immediately we think about, oh, wait, what do I have to offer? But
Yeah.
and that's that inner critic, right?
Mhm.
And it's like, where do you think that shows up the most when we're trying to grow a business?
Well, I think it's what holds us back, right? We
Hmm.
don't take chances. We kind of have a checklist, right? So like, maybe you're posting on LinkedIn every day or maybe you're doing your social media things and you're like, "Okay, I'm doing all of these things. Why am I not seeing the results?" And what it is that you're doing all of the same things that everyone else is doing. And so you have to really
Yes.
self-identify what it is that takes you out of your comfort zone because that's where we grow the most, right? When we're in those uncomfortable places, when we're trying to figure out, what it is that we want to do next. And so I think it's really our own insecurities that prevent us from going to the next level.
Yes, I 100% agree with that.
Yeah.
But what's the difference between like a healthy self evaluation and self sabotage, say?
Yeah. I mean, I've had clients that will sign up for a podcast campaign and they'll record a couple of podcasts and just go, okay, I'm too busy, right? I'm too busy
Mm,
because they aren't as confident. They don't feel as equipped to maybe answer some questions, right? Not every host is they're gonna take you out of your comfort zone. I've had a client that, he had his own podcast. He did, 50 podcasts with us. And around like the 25 mark, a host threw him for a loop. He asked him a question and he was like, I've never been asked that. I didn't know how to answer that. And one of the most beautiful things about recording a podcast is that 9 times out of 10, it's pre recorded. So if I go in and I say something really ridiculous or you stump me and I stumble on my words, I can go, Janice, when we were at, the 5 minute mark, I stuttered and I said something really crazy. Would you mind editing that out? Or, hey, I need to stop and we need to go back and revisit that. So,
mhm.
you know, there are so many reasons that I think people come up with in their mind why it's too hard. But I think there are so many ways that if you're willing to sort of rip the Band-Aid off, if you will, put yourself out there, be uncomfortable and take a chance, the benefits are so plentiful that it's silly not to.
It really ups your not only your visibility but also your authority, right? Because you are
Absolutely.
somebody that, yeah, and you probably know a lot more than you think you know. I think we get so into our little silos that
Mhm.
we forget that people outside of that silo
Yeah.
don't know anything oftentimes about what we're talking about. So,
100%. And, as I'm working with my clients, I will tell them, right? Like, if you like me, maybe someone's an executive coach, right? There's a million executive coaches. What is it that makes you different, right? I had a client, she's an executive coach. She talks about Sawabana leadership, right? I had no idea what that is, but I'm like, I'm intrigued because of the way that she speaks about it. So, as
mhm,
we are talking about people going on podcasts, one of the great things is that you have an instant authority, right? You don't have to go on and the host says, tell us about yourself and you recite your resume and all the things. The host is vouching for you, right? They have the audience that trusts them. They have looked at you and said, "Hey, you'd be a great fit for my podcast." So going on, you have sort of an immediate authority and the listeners get to listen to you have a casual conversation with someone that they also trust for 30 minutes to get an idea of who you are, what's important to you, you present them with a problem and then you share a solution and they go, you know what? I love that. I want to work with that person. I want to learn more about that person, or I want to learn more about that idea. So that's something that can be so impactful to you, because a lot of times people say, well, I have this great product or I have this great idea, but people don't know about me. And so this is a great opportunity to get that visibility there.
Oh, absolutely. And I heard somewhere recently that somebody said every business owner should be putting themselves out there once each day, like
Mhm.
every day, putting yourself out there doing something.
Mhm.
And I started thinking about that, and that's my weak area, honestly. It's,
Yeah.
and I work in marketing. My whole life has been in
Yeah.
marketing, but we all have things that hold us back. And for me, it's that first step, that first visibility. But I love that you talk about the guest who was thrown for a loop by
Mhm.
the interviewer, because that actually happened to me. And I talk about it in the intro, where I had somebody ask me a bunch of statistics
Mhm.
in an interview, and I didn't have them handy, and
Yeah.
I couldn't tell them. So I just like, I don't know. I mean, and I was able to walk my way through it and around it and kind of rephrase the question. So I felt it made more sense. But that's absolutely true. I mean, I, I, I've had guests that have messed up, and I've messed up,
Yeah.
doing podcasts, and it is easy to edit it out. But you think that, if you're putting yourself out there, people are looking for perfection.
Mhm.
And that's really, I don't think that's why people tune into podcasts. I think people listen because they want to hear real people with real conversations talking about like things that they relate to and in ways just like them,
Yeah,
right?
absolutely. I think we have, in the day of AI, right?
Yeah.
I've listened to podcasts and they've been so perfect. I'm like, is that a real person or is that AI? I mean, honestly, I've sent it to teammates and been like, I think this is AI. And so I think it really comes down to like that authenticity. One of the things we do is, we'll do like an interview analysis with our clients, right? What went well? What are some, ways that you can be better? And one of the things that we do is if you use words, specific words a lot. I say like and a ton.
Hmm.
I am mindful of it. I try to correct it. But like, again, it's not perfect, but this is who I am. And I think that coming from a place of being authentically who you are, and that way, if someone listens to you on a podcast and wants to work with you, they go, I already know Kristen. I know, that she uses like a lot. I know because they see you and they hear you on the podcast, so they know what to expect. It's not, something, it's not a surprise, right? So
Hmm.
I think being authentic, especially in this day and age of AI, is so critical because people listen to you and they feel connected, right? And that's what it's really about. It's about that connection.
100%. Yeah. And now we have, like when I edit podcasts, well, I don't edit my own, but my editor uses something called the script,
Mhm.
which will pull out all the ums, because I do that too.
Yep.
I just did it there, right? Yeah. And I think, we have this back and forth where I want to clean up everything that I say and get rid of all those ums and so on. He's like, no, this is what makes it authentic.
Mhm.
And it is nice to have that, because I have had some guests that have said, this, that, and it's just over and over where it becomes distracting. And I'll pull out some of those for
Yeah.
sure and clean them up a little bit. But you're absolutely right. Um, I just did it again. Now I'm
Yeah, now
paranoid.
you're like hyper. I do that too. You get hyper aware and you're like, oh,
Yeah. But yeah, so I think you're absolutely right. So do you think people like overcomplicate podcasting, visibility in general, but just especially podcasting, like when they are ready to say, okay, I want to do some podcasts. Do you think it's just not as complicated as they think?
So, yes and no, right? So, I
Okay.
think it depends, and it goes back to the strategy piece, right? I think, some people are like, I've seen the advertisement on my Facebook, it'll pop up and it's like, pitch yourself to 3.8 million podcasts. And I like look at that because I've been in the industry and go, why would anyone want to do that, right? Like, if you're just going on podcasts to go on podcasts, that's a hobby. That's not a business decision. So when we talk about strategy, it needs to be that you're maximizing the visibility, right? And so a lot of times people will come to me and say, I want to be on these very large podcasts. I've had clients say, I want to be on Joe Rogan. And I'm like, you don't want to be on Joe Rogan. Those are not your people, right? Let's find
Hmm.
out who is your target audience and where are they hanging out. And if we can find that, it's like It's almost like if you think about like a keynote speech, right? If your target audience is dentists and you're going to a dentist convention and you're in front of 1,000 dentists, that would be great, right? Podcasting works in a very similar way, with the exception of I don't have to travel and I don't have to physically be in front of 1,000 people, right? I can go on a podcast. I can have a conversation. It's just you and I. So if I'm an introverted person and the thought of going and speaking in front of a huge audience is terrifying to me, podcasting is wonderful for you, right? It's just you and I having a conversation. And so when I think of the best podcasts that I've listened to, it's usually the ones, and I may sound a little crazy when I say this, where I feel like I'm sitting in a coffee shop and I have two people next to me having
Yes.
a conversation and I'm listening to them and going, oh, wow, that's really great. And so it's not like a sales, you're not doing a sales commercial. It's literally a conversation. And so if we can frame it around, I'm just going to have coffee with Janice today and we're just going to talk about things, it's so much less pressure than if I'm like, I got to prepare this, I got to do this. Now, I do tell my clients, don't show up unless you're prepared, right? We give them a brief
Mhm.
sheet. I tell them who the target audience is. I may give them some pointers. I want them to show up understanding the people that they're going to be speaking with. And there are some hosts that will provide, questions. I do have some clients that, want what I call some training wheels, right? They want to know what to expect. And in those cases, those are maybe the first one or two podcasts that I'll strategically book them on so they can kind of have that. And then they get
Mhm.
comfortable and then they move out of that, right?
Mhm.
But I think it's really about how we're looking at what does that look like, right? And how do I approach that? And it really comes down to the strategy.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. I agree 100%. I think there is so much benefit that can come if you really, especially are hyper focused on a particular ideal customer.
Yeah.
And there are so many niche podcasts out there
Hmm.
that it's perfect for that.
Yeah,
So,
absolutely.
is there anybody that you think should not be a podcast guest? Like who this isn't really right for?
So I think people that come to be a podcast guest from a space of ego, right? I want to be an influencer. I want to be on the top podcast, right? I want to be on Joe Rogan. I'm like, that's not realistic, right? And so we have to have those conversations around what type of guests does Joe Rogan have? And then are you that caliber of guest? And sometimes that's a very difficult conversation. And we do that with, other podcasts like Brene Brown and things like that. But I think the best guests come from a place of I'm here to educate and I'm here to teach about what my background is or what my product is or what my service is. So if you're coming from a place of ego, it's probably not going to be the right fit for you. You're not going to have, hosts are not going to welcome you. And I always
Hmm.
tell my clients, going on going on a podcast is like someone inviting you into their home, right? You go in with respect. We're not going on to sell, we're not selling anything. We're teaching and we're sharing the expertise and what we have. And so anybody that's coming on to sell, that's probably not for you.
That is very true. I've had guests that have
Hmm.
done that, and I've had guests that have tried to turn the interview around a little bit,
Hmm.
and it's pretty upsetting actually. It's just
Yeah.
it makes me angry
Yeah.
because I'll ask them a question, they're like, "No, I don't want to answer that one, but here's what I will tell you," or they'll pitch themselves in every answer that they give. I don't think that's good for the listener. And my number one priority is to my listeners
Hmm.
because without them, I don't have a podcast.
Yep.
So I, as much as I try and pre-screen, and I've gotten better about picking up who's going to be like that. But yeah, I think you're right. That's not the right attitude for podcasts at all.
Yeah. I've had a client that shared with me that, she went on a podcast. And so she'd asked for the questions beforehand and she told the host, like, hey, you asked me a question. I'm going to answer the question. I want you to ask me in order. And when I'm done answering the question, I'm going to nod so you know that you can go on to the next question. And I was absolutely mortified because I'm like, you should maybe be a host versus a guest because that's probably more of your lane
Mm,
with how you want to conduct the interview.
yeah, that's a really good way to have your eyes opened is
Yes.
to just try to turn it around a little bit.
Mhm.
So that's what makes a poor guest. But what makes somebody a great podcast guest?
Absolutely. So I think being prepared, right? We want to make sure that you know who the host is, who their audience is, and you want to come in with a sense of how am I bringing value, right? Bringing value to the host and bring value to the audience. And I think a lot of times people think that I'm going to go be on a podcast. As soon as the recording stops, I'm going to sit back and I'm going to take advantage of the host audience. And I do not believe that is the right way to do it, right? I think that when the recording stops, that's when the real benefits start, right? So having a relationship and connecting with the host on LinkedIn is a key thing for me, right? You want to connect, you want to
Mhm.
go back and forth. You want to be able to network. I tell my clients, if someone is a good host and their audience is the right target audience for you, there is a networking opportunity there for you, right? You can send them clients that make sense. They can send you clients that make sense. I had a client that was a guest on a podcast, and she was asked to be a keynote speaker at a future conference for that host because he loved her
Mm.
energy so much. So they were
Mhm.
able to continue the relationship beyond that. I believe that when the podcast episode is released, and this is a huge piece that I think a lot of times people miss, is around the promotion, right? And I tell my clients, if you're promoting the episode, the host is going to see that and they're going to promote it more. It's mutually beneficial to the both of you. And then the last piece that I also think people tend to miss out on is the repurposing, right? I can take our video and I can pull 30 to 60-second clips, right? If you hate putting together videos every day, like you talked about in the beginning, a podcast is a great way to not have to do that. If I come to you and I say, hey, Janice, after our recording, when this publishes, can I get a copy of it so I can pull some, short clips that I can share on my social media? 9 times out of 10, the host is going to be like, absolutely, because again, it's mutually beneficial. You
Mhm.
are then able to take those clips and repurpose them on social media, and it's a win-win for everybody.
Yeah, I 100% agree with everything you said, and especially the networking part. I think that was
Mhm.
something that I wasn't really looking for when I started podcasting.
Yeah.
But I've gotten to know so many amazing people through podcasting, and I do reach out to some of them and
Yeah.
say, I'd love to have you, maybe just have you on another episode. I'd love to see if you can work out because I have clients of my own, and
Yeah.
so yeah, definitely networking is I think kind of forgotten about
Yes.
podcasting. Hmm.
And I think to piggyback on that, I think that those relationships, especially, and I mentioned this before, but like as we're in the age of I think that relationships are so critical. So one of our core values at Interview Valet is relationships are the ultimate currency. And I'm sure you can attest to this, that you probably get a ton of emails and it's like, hey, Janice, we have this guest for you. And it's like somebody that has nothing to do with like what you want to talk about, right? And it's just now people can just, kind of rapid fire those pitches, if you will. And so it like there's no value to you as a host, right? So what happens is the relationships that we have with people are going to be so critical because there's this what we call AI slop, right? If people can mass produce these introductions or these pitches, what does it come down to, right? If you see an email from my team, you go, oh, that's Interview Valet. I know them. I can trust them. I know they're not
Hmm.
sending me AI stuff that doesn't make sense. And so
Hmm.
if we're able to make those connections now and we're able to build those relationships now, I think that those are going to be far more beneficial later as we continue to see, the AI slop kind of coming through.
Hmm. Hmm. And I do see a lot of that.
Yeah.
And what is really interesting to me is that all the emails are the same.
Hmm.
So it's like they went to ChatGPT and said, "I need an email to pitch for podcasts,"
Yeah.
and I can just spot them the first line
Hmm.
because they're all the same. And so that's definitely one mistake people I think make when they're pitching is that they don't think about the audience and how it will benefit me.
Hmm.
I've never heard of you. I don't know anything about you. How is my audience going to benefit from this? How am I going to benefit from this? Give before taking kind of
Yeah.
thing. Are there some other things that mistakes that people will make when they're pitching?
Yeah, I think finding relevance, right? Like what is it? What is the value that you bring? Like when I'm like talking to a new client and I'm building their one sheet, right? I'm talking about, and we will do like topics, right? And how I explain it to them is the topic should read as if it's a podcast episode title, right? We want them to be engaging. We want the host to go, "Oh, that's really cool. Like I want to talk to them about that." And so I think it's really about how you present yourself too. And so when you talk about getting those, AI generated emails, like that's your foot forward, right? That's the first your initial impression to a host, and you only get one opportunity to make that first impression. So you want to make sure that it's like very professional, on brand with you, and it's the right foot forward that you want with the host to get the outcome that you want, right? And it could be, hey, I listen to these couple of podcasts and I love that you share this value and you talk about this. I feel the same. And here's some ways that, I could bring value to your audience. We have an internal podcast at Interview Valet, and I do some work with that as well. And there will oftentimes be people that, pitch themselves. And I'm just like, this has nothing to do with, because our podcast is highly niche, it's a highly niche podcast. And I'm like, you're just literally kind of casting a wide net and seeing what comes in. And I don't think that that's the best approach either, because we're not thinking about, is that on brand with what I want, right? Is this a good representation of who I am? When I'm looking at potential podcasts for my clients, I'm looking at and I'm listening to the host. Will the host and the client have a good conversation? Will they align on things, right? It's not just, hey, I'm looking at the description and going, okay, the target audience is great. I'm taking it a step further and going, are they going to have a good conversation? Is this a good opportunity for networking? Is there more to that? And I think so often we're just sort of like, throwing spaghetti on a wall and seeing what sticks. And that's not the best strategy.
No, it definitely is not. Yeah, I think it burns some bridges, actually.
Absolutely.
So back to pitching. Do you have a way in which you recommend people approach it? Let's say I've never done a podcast before, but I want to be on, I don't know, Amy Porterfield's podcast, who's a big marketing podcast. I probably wouldn't start there, right? So
Right.
how do you, do you have a way to work up to the bigger names, or is there how do you approach that?
Yeah. So at Interview Valet, pitch is one of our 4-letter words. We prefer the word introduction
Okay.
because we want to introduce people. We don't pitch them. You pitch a ball. We want to introduce people so that they can have those relationships. But if I have a client and they say, I want to be on a very high level podcast, what we can do is we source multiple databases. So I can take the Amy Porterfield podcast and I can see what other podcasts the listeners of that podcast listen to, right? So you're in the same audience. It just may not be as large of an audience. So if you're just starting out, you start out with a couple of the smaller podcasts, again, similar audience, and you get really good at telling your stories, at connecting with the audience, and then you work your way up. And so when we have clients that maybe have never podcasted before, maybe they've never spoken before. I've had a client in the past that said, I've never even listened to a podcast before. Someone told me to do this and I gave you guys a call and thought it was a great idea. And so it's really around the strategy of how do you work yourself up to that? And then how do we highlight what you're doing and how do we work with the host to show, the value that you bring to them? So it's really just sort of like you crawl before you walk, or you crawl before you run, essentially.
So you basically build that relationship with the audience before you approach. Okay, got it.
Yes. And the other thing that I will also mention is that when people want to be on these higher level podcasts with, that I would consider to be like viral ones, we look at what value do you bring to the host? Because a lot of times people will come and they'll say, I want to be on Entrepreneurs on Fire. And I'm like, okay, that's great. Well, what does your social media look like? What does your email list look like, right? Is it going to bring value to the host for you to be a guest? And if not, then sometimes there are, what we call pay to play, right? A host will say, I'm going to have you as a guest on my podcast. However, you have to pay a certain amount of money to do that. And like Entrepreneurs on Fire, he charges to be a guest on the podcast. And people pay it because they see the value there.
Yeah, I didn't realize that. That's interesting.
Yeah.
He does or he used to do a podcast every day. Does he still do that?
Yes, he still does it every day.
Okay. Wow.
Yeah.
So one thing I think that I didn't really realize about podcasting until I got into it is that if you have an appearance on a podcast, and let's say you have a launch coming up or something's coming out, that it often is more of a branding exercise than it is a top of funnel exercise, right? So you think, okay, 5,000 people are going to hear me, whatever number. and they're all going to want to run and download my freebie.
Mhm.
And that's not always the way it works, because that's a big leap to go from you're out on a run, you're listening to a podcast. You've got to remember who that what podcast it was, which you probably would remember that, but you've got to remember who the host was. You've got to go back, find their email, find their website, to go back and get that freebie. So I think that's important to know, because I think I've had guests on where they've been really disappointed at the amount of traffic that they didn't get from being on a podcast.
Yeah. And I think that with this, there's like a multi-layer strategy with that, right? So as you're talking, people are running, as people are listening to podcasts, they're running, they're in the car, they're doing a bunch of different things. I think one thing that I always tell my clients that you can guarantee is at the end of a podcast, a host is going to say, well, where can our listeners find you? And I see it happen all the time where people will say, here's my LinkedIn, here's my email, find me here. They give you like a laundry list of 50 different places to find them. That's not the right thing to do, right? You want to have one concise place. So whether that is what we call a welcome page or a landing page, hey, you can find me here at this website. It's, you spell it out, you give them something memorable. Like I always say, mine is interviewvalet.com/Kristen, and I'll give like my name is spelled Kristen. Don't spell it with an I. Most people do. And that way it's sort of like something to remind them of the spelling of my name. And so you want to do that, right? So you make it easy for them. And then the other part to that is that you also get, because it's not just leads, right? Like we look at everything from a leads perspective. You also have to look at what is the SEO value? What is the LMO or LLMO or whatever? I feel like the terminology changes, but what are the AI models picking up on from the value of you being on a podcast? So yes, leads are important, but there's also all of these other things that I think people maybe don't consider. Also, you're building the relationship with the host. You're moving yourself up as a thought leader, right? The more podcasts you do, the more content you get, you're able to do that. So it's sort of this like strategic, multi-level approach that isn't just like the specific leads, just like it's not just the specific downloads, right? A lot of times people will say, well, I want an X number of downloads. Well, that can be deceiving, right? Like we want to talk about what is the comprehensive profile of the value that you as a guest bring, as well as what does the host bring.
That's absolutely true, because I think if you start raising your expectations in terms of sales from a podcast appearance, there's so much friction that it will get in the way. And even at the end of my podcast, I will say you can find my show notes at myweeklymarketing.com / and I'll give a number, an episode number. And even there, the numbers of people that I get are not as high as definitely, I don't know. I can't tell you turbo statistics, but it's a small percentage of people that will actually click through and go to the show notes and find the link and click the link and go and do that thing. I mean, we're so busy. We've got, stuff in front of our eyes all the time that I just really think it's important to set that expectation.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's the thing. I think going into it, with a specific expectation, like a certain number of visitors to your website or anything like that, I think it's really about how am I offering the value, right? And what else is it that I'm getting? Because if I have a guest, like I had, as an example, I had a client that was with us. He was in law firm growth. He had one person listen to him on a podcast, one person, and that he was able to close a $90,000 deal just from that one person. And he was a service-based business, right? And so that, took care of any of the cost involved with it, right? It was a huge payoff for him. So I think, going into it, having a mentality of like, I'm here to serve. What it is that it takes podcast interview marketing. It's not a megaphone. It's a magnet, right? So it's organically bringing people to you versus you just shouting at people.
Love that analogy.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, all right. So let's say I'm doing what you say. I've got a really unique value proposition. I want to get out there and do some podcasts, but they're still feeling a little nervous, but maybe excited. So what would be their first step?
So I will tell you, when I first started doing this on behalf of Interview Valet, I picked topics that I was really, really comfortable with, right? So I'm a mom. I So I would talk about, what is your busy schedule like, right? And so the topics that I chose, while still relevant to my work at Interview Valet, were topics that I felt really equipped and able to talk about. So if you need to pick topics that you're like, okay, these are my training wheel topics, do it, right? And then work your way up. And so as I sort of do, more podcasts, then I sort of evolve what I want to talk about, what I can talk about. So, and I will tell you, my first podcast episode that I did as a guest is not great. Like going into it and having like very low expectations, I think is very realistic, right? If you're just going there, you're ripping the Band-Aid off, you're having a good conversation, you're understanding what that's like, you're
Mhm.
learning, you're growing, and then you're taking that into the next one and you're making it even better, right? And so one of the things that we do is we do something called an interview analysis. So for our clients, the first 3 podcasts that they do, we send them an analysis. What went well? What maybe didn't go as great? And here are some ways that we think you could improve, right? It's always positive. Um,
Mhm.
but it'll be things like, what was your share of speaking, right? We want it to be more like 50-50, 60-40, so that it's a conversation and you're not just speaking at the host. We
Mhm.
want to make you aware of, are you saying specific words like an Are you, what are some key phrases that we see that you use that you can take and brand, right? You're using these phrases quite a bit. These are things that you should probably lean into and make part of your marketing strategy. So, and then there's additional things that we also talk about, but really just providing the value and showing up with an attitude of like, this is going to be something that may not be in my wheelhouse. I'm going to be a little comfortable, but I'm going to do it anyway because I'm going to rip the Band-Aid off and I'm going to make it better each and every time that I hit record.
Yeah, I think that's 100% on. It's like anything, you're doing
Yes.
video, anything, you just have to do it again and again and again, again.
Mhm.
And eventually you will get better at it and it'll become easier. And I think
Absolutely.
there's so much value in podcasting for sure. Uh,
Absolutely.
so you work with guests, getting them on podcasts. Do you work with podcasters, finding guests for them as well? Does it work that way as well?
So we have kind of 2 teams. So I am a client account manager, and then we have podcast relationship managers. So our podcast relationship managers, they manage the relationship with the hosts, and then I manage the relationship with the clients. And there are, I think, like 6 or 7 of us. And so it's really we have it's actually really interesting how we have kind of things laid out. I will often tell my clients, like, we have what we call a triple layer approach, right? So I'll kind of pull back the curtain for you as a host so you can kind of get an idea of what that looks like too. But we have a prospecting team. So the prospectors will go through and send a potential, bunch of podcasts to me. I, as a client account manager, would go through and say, yes, this is a good fit, or no, it's not a good fit. If it's not a good fit, I'm going to give a reason so we can refine the process. If it is a good fit, I'm going to pass it over to my podcast relationship manager. They're going to look at it and go, oh yeah, Janice has been looking for this type of guest. This is great. I'm going to make the introduction. And the host says yes or no. So by the time
Gotcha.
that it gets to the host, we've had many people internally go, yes, this is the right fit, or no, this is not the right fit. And so it's not just like throwing spaghetti at a wall. Like we have multiple eyes on it going, okay, this is a good fit. And this is the right fit for the podcast host and the client.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
That's very thorough. That's
Yeah,
so appreciated for someone like me who's busy and having to screen guests is tough. So that's good to know.
absolutely.
So, Kristen, where can people find out more about you?
Yeah, absolutely. So you can find me at my landing page. It is interviewvalet with a V.com/Kristen. And that's Kristen with an E, not an I. Everyone misspells that. And there you'll be able to do your free interview analysis if you would like to get that. Tom has his book, Podcast Guest Profits. He's our CEO. And then there's also an opportunity to schedule a discovery call if you'd like to learn more about working with Interview Valet. You can also, my social media information is there. I would love to connect with you on LinkedIn and learn more about you.
Love it. And of course, everything will be in the show notes for today, too. Kristen, thank you so much. I have learned a lot about podcasting. Even after years doing this, there's still more to learn. So I appreciate it.
Yeah, absolutely. Awesome. I really enjoyed our conversation.
I love that she reminded us that confidence doesn't magically appear before you take action. It grows because you take action. So if podcast guesting has been sitting in the back of your mind as something you might want to do someday, maybe this is your nudge. You have a story to tell, so getting out there on podcasts is a great way to do that. For more information about anything we talked about today, visit myweeklymarketing.com/148. I'll see you next time. Bye for now.